Hello everybody and welcome back to our Unreal Engine 4 and Playfab series. In this episode we're going to be looking into the economy of Playfab. So in order to get to the economy you go to Engage and then Economy. In here you'll have two tabs, Catalogs and Currency. In Currency, obviously this is going to be the virtual currency of your game. You can set this up pretty simply and we'll go into that shortly. First, so we're going to look into Catalogs. This is where all of your store items will be for done for the game. Now you can set up and you need to set up individual items first, and then you can then create things like stores and drop tables and containers for different ways of giving items to players. So you can give them an individual item, or you can give them like a container which will contain multiple items and maybe even virtual currency. So like you can set up different things or different bundles or packages or tables for when people win at a certain leaderboard. Like they get a certain position, they get a certain bundle, and within that bundle there's so many items or so many virtual currency. So in this episode we're going to be going through all of that. Now we are probably going to hook this up into Engine as well. I'm probably going to do a little bit outside of the video for basic setup. Now you probably want to get this working first inside of Playfab, and that's what we're going to do, and then we're going to hook it up into the engine to show just the basics of the engine being able to read the player's inventory to make sure that they've got any items, read the store, or find an item, probably with stores that we want to show the player through some sort of UI. However, it's mostly just going to be detailed into logs. Now, you're probably going to want to hook that up straight into your store system. So we'll give a basic rundown of everything that's returned via Playfab in data-wise that you can use for your stores, but I'm not going to create an entire store UI system just to show you that it's working. It's mostly just going to be printed in logs. So let's get started. Now, as you can see here, you can actually upload JSONs. Because the catalog items are JSON created and they're stored as JSONs, you can upload them as JSON. So if it might be better if you want to create an absolute ton of items to create a first one, like just as we're going to show now, then export it as a JSON or create the JSON itself using the data that you've got, then do it all within like something like Notepad++ or something like that, and then import or upload the JSON to Playfab. This will save you a lot of time when it comes to the menial side of things if you're doing an absolute ton of data. We won't be doing this, we're just going to be creating a couple of items, so it's much easier for us to do it just on Playfab. So the first thing you need to do is create a catalog. Now the catalog that you create first will be the default catalog. When the API searches for items, it will automatically default to the default catalog. You can pass through a name of the catalog to look for, however, most of the time I seem to find that it's better to keep most things inside of one catalog that revolve around the same thing. So if you want to have a store in your game that offers the player virtual currency for real currency, create a catalog for that. If you want a store in the game that offers some sort of item for virtual currency, create a different catalog for that. Now, you can't have items in bundles between different catalogs. So if you want to have a lot of different bundles, or like a store that rotates continuously that has lots of different things on offer for the virtual currency, it's better to keep everything inside one catalog, because you can't mix the catalogs together within bundles or containers. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't add virtual currency in, because it's actually a separate tab for virtual currency, because it's classed differently. The only thing that you might want a different catalog for is if you want to set up a store to sell virtual currency to the player, whereas if you want it inside of a bundle or a container as part of an offer, then it's showed differently and it's set up differently, and we'll go into that further down the line. So let's create our first catalog and call it, I'm just going to call mine default. You probably want to call yours something a little better. Actually, I'm just going to call mine test. It's a lot easier to have this set up as something that you're going to remember. So if you're going to have, if your game's based around something that revolves and you're going to sell a lot of artwork, say something like Dota 2, where everything is pretty much skins, you would probably call the catalog skins so that you can remember it easily. So you're just going to want to create it and save catalog. Then it will bring you to this screen. From this screen, it automatically creates an item for you, A catalog has to have an item in. You can't then just go and delete this item. It will then delete the catalog, because it will go, oh, well, there's nothing in here. What's the point of having it? So always make sure there's at least one item in here, which is why it creates the first one. So we have items, bundles, and as you can see here, bundles are a collection of item and virtual currency that you can unpack into the player's inventory when granted. Containers, which are pretty much the same thing, yeah, a collection of items and virtual currency that remain in the player's inventory until opened. The difference here is that bundles unpack into the player's inventory when granted, so they buy something and then it's immediately awarded to them. Like the bundle will unpack and give them whatever's contained in the bundle. The container will sit in their inventory until they actually tell the Playfab API to unbundle the pack. So you need to make sure that you're using the right one. Drop table. Now this is useful for like a leaderboard, and depending on where the leaderboard is, or this is useful for when something has a random chance. So something like Hearthstone, where you open up a pack and it gives you random cards. You can set up a drop table to set up all the cards that would be available in a certain pack and their chances. We'll go into all of these individually anyway further on, but I'm just giving you the basics. And then a store is just simply a store of your items, basically. This is useful for if you maybe don't want to have all the items available from the very get-go and you want to have stores that switch using an automated timer through the cloud scripts that we've shown in previous episode, where it resets every day and every day it picks like a random table, or maybe it goes on to the next one, and then with that it sets a store and the store updates the items that are in it. Again, we will go into that later. So let's just start off with the basic creating our first item. So let's get started with looking into the item. Now on the items tab, you can bulk edit and duplicate items that you already have. The bulk edit is pretty useful if you want to change something of a lot, and I mean a lot of different things, because it will do it automatically. I'll just show you a quick example here. You can change things like, say, like if you wanted to add a tag, or if you wanted them to, say if you suddenly decide that your game is going to have a marketplace and you want everything to be able to be traded with other players, instead of having to go through every single time and tick is tradable, you can literally just is tradable, update this, and then edit items. Now, if you have hundreds or even thousands of items in here, this will do it automatically for you, which can save a lot of time. However, be careful when editing a lot of items, because you might accidentally select an item that you don't want to change and it will update everything, whether it has something in it or not. There is also a coupon. Now, this is pretty new to Playfab, but it's quite useful. So you can create coupons for players to be able to download or upload via the game. So you can create a little UI within the game, call the redeem coupon API through Playfab, or again use it in Cloud Script, which is probably a little bit better because it will verify against the server, and they will get the item or whatever the coupon is for through that. Now this is probably useful further down the line, when you're much further past this, when you have a lot of items to choose from and you're doing marketing, or you're doing videos with Twitch users. So you've got a streamer who has a decent following, and you want to give them a coupon to give to their viewers that might entice them to download the game. This would be really useful, but we're not really going to use this because we don't really have the use for it. This is again much better down the line, once pretty much most of the game is ready to go and you're at the marketing stage where you're trying to make a push for players to play the game. And say if you can get a good streamer or a good YouTuber up on the game, then you might want to give them coupons in order to entice their viewers to play the game. That's the sort of thing you want to use this for. But again, we're going to ignore it for now. If you were going to do it, you simply just download the coupon. It'll download just a simple CSV file. We'll just open it up just to show you what it looks like. And all you do is give this to the YouTuber or Twitch, and it's a simple file text, simply like this. Now, when creating this in your game, when you want to do the redeem side of things, you probably want to put in some sort of verification to make sure that it's laid out the same way, because it will always be 3 characters then 4 characters, then 3 characters. You probably want to put in some sort of verification to make sure that the user's not trying to do something fishy, or can only add in so many characters per bit. So maybe a 3 character, then the dash, then 4 characters, then the dash, then the 3 characters again. Again, that's purely down to you, and again, it's probably better to save this till later down the line. It's something that we may look into further on towards the end of our series, when we get to the point where everything is sort of set up and we're going to go through the additional stuff. But for now, let's just jump into the item that they give us for starter. Again, it's pretty easy to create an item if you just want to get ahead and start. There's just a new item button up there, and it will just create a new item for you, and it will automatically bring you into this table. So on this table, we have the following. So here we have the item ID. Now this has to be unique to each item, so make sure that you keep that in mind. The display name and the description, this, because we're going to be using Steam, this will show up on the Steam pop-up overlay when you come to purchase the item. It will give you the display name and the description, so make sure these are usually accurate to what you're actually going to do, especially if it involves virtual currency and you put in the exact amount of virtual currency the player is going to be getting. Make sure this matches the exact amount of virtual currency that the player is going to be getting, otherwise you could get into some legal trouble. Other than that, you have a few other fields here. You've got item class, tags, and image URL. Now, image URL, it says here it's mainly for the Facebook side of purchasing if you're going to make a Facebook game. It can be pretty useful if you want somebody to look at the item first. If it's something specific, say like a skin for Dota 2, and you want them to actually see the skin beforehand. If it's things like virtual currency, players don't want to just open up a URL of a coin or of a virtual currency image. They don't need it. There's other options here as well. There's stackable, which I would probably recommend for most things. You want to make them stackable, because Playfab will only allow each player, so each individual player of the game, to have 1,000 different items in their inventory by default. Obviously, if you get into the upgrade of the accounts and you start paying for Playfab, you can increase it, especially towards the higher end, like the enterprise side of things. But for the most part, it's a 1,000 cap, so you probably want to keep this as is stackable. Is tradable is specifically down to you, especially if you're going to create a trading system for the game. And here's token for character creation. This is more for like an RPG style of game. I haven't personally used this, but it probably could be useful again for the RPG style. And there's also limited edition. Now, this does give you a little information. Enforce a limited supply of this item. So this will be global across all players. So if you wanted, say, like a special event that happens and there's only 1,000 of these items and that's it, once they're gone, then you can do that like through this, and it will automatically sort it all out for you. And as soon as the 1,000 item is sold, it will mean that whenever a player tries to buy it, it will come back with an error saying that there's no more available of the item. Obviously, you'll have to create a specific error to show on screen to the player to say, the item's out of stock because the 1,000th one was sold or something like that. But again, this is pretty useful if you want a very, very limited item within your game. Now, consumable, you have durable, which means it just exists in the player's inventory, which is good for just the standard items. When you start to get into things like bundles and containers, which obviously, automatically break down, or even stores, you want to probably look into the consumable side of things, so that when somebody purchases the bundle, say like if you had a bundle with a few items in, it consumes it automatically by default after a certain amount of time. Now, you can do it by count, so that after you have so many of said item, it automatically unbundles it. However, I would probably set it by time, and it says it must always be more than 2 seconds. So about 3 seconds. I mean, the player isn't really going to notice that, mainly due to Steam having its pop-up overlay and its authorization and all that sort of stuff. By the time that the player even returns back to the game, it's probably already been about 2 seconds. So they're only going to be there for about 1 second, if that, which is pretty damn short, and then it will automatically unbundle itself. So as long as you allow for that, you can probably update your UI in that time. Now, the last thing is prices, which obviously is super important. Now, once we create a virtual currency, you can select it from this drop down. RM stands for real money. Now, Playfab by default automatically uses dollars as its money. So you probably want to set about using it as well, just out of ease. There's no way to change this, that it'll automatically use dollars. However, the platforms that the game is running on, say like Steam, whenever the player comes to buy the item, it will automatically update up because it's using Steam. It'll automatically use their local currency anyway. So the best thing to do, especially when you're first starting off, if you're going to use something like Steam, is put a little disclaimer at the bottom of your store that says all prices are based in dollars. However, your platform or Steam will automatically update this to the correct currency when bought, and Steam automatically does all of the different prices as well. So $10 in Steam might be different to pound, and it automatically changes it and updates it. So you want to make sure that you have a little disclaimer somewhere to say it. Now, once you have a virtual currency, which we'll set up in a second, you simply select it from this drop down and you put in the amount. With virtual currency, it always has to be a whole number. Again, same with real money. So this won't. So say if you wanted $19.99, this won't work. It doesn't work in the sense of $19.99. It works in the sense of pennies, basically, or cents. And so you have to put it as 1,999. This will then convert it to 1999. I know it sounds a little bit weird, but this is just the way that Playfab does it. Now, custom data can be pretty useful if there is something specifically attached to an item or you want to pass through with an item in order to give the player information. Now, you need to be careful with this because items custom data can only be read for the item of the store through the catalog, whereas if it's in the player's inventory, the custom data might not be set perfectly right, or it might not be set at all. There is an API call you can do in order to update inventory items with the custom data from the catalog's item. However, sometimes this can get a little bit messy, so you need to be careful with this. It's probably better for something like virtual currency, where you put in, say, 720, which will give you the player 720 coins, and you tell it exactly how many coins here to pass through to update the player's virtual currency with. Before we create our first items, we're just going to quickly hop across to the currency and set up a virtual currency, just so that when we set up the items, we can use the virtual currency that we create. Now, you can view the tutorial that they give, however, it is just a text documentation within the Playfab that literally just goes over what all the fields do, all of that sort of stuff. So this can be useful. As you can see, it does give you examples on how to do different things, but I'm just going to give you a quick run of basically what's in here anyway. So if we go to new currency, we have currency code. Now this is 2 uppercase characters that need to be represented by your currency. Pick something decent that you're going to remember, because whenever you do anything with virtual currency through the Playfab API, it requires the currency code. So I'm just going to put mine as PP, and then in the name, we're just going to put test coins. Now this name, as said in here, it's required, and it's just basically the name that's attached to it. You can display it, you can get the virtual currency name within the Playfab API, so you can call from your game to get the display name, so that you can dynamically update this, and it updates it correctly. So it isn't really that useful because most people represent coins in game via an image, so like gems or diamonds or just like gold or anything like that. So most of the time you'll probably find that people won't actually care what this is called. They're most likely interested in the image, and if the image looks good, they'll probably just go with that. Other things to remember with currency that you might not associate with currency is that whenever you come across a game, especially on mobile, that have lives, like so you do a certain amount of missions a day or a certain amount of levels a day, and each level requires a heart, or if you fail, it takes out a heart. They're actually currencies, and this is how we set them up. So we have an initial deposit, recharge rate, and recharge maximum. So if you were going to create a mobile game and you wanted, say, hearts of, I don't know, 5, like just 5 as the basic, and obviously players are going to need that initially when they load in, although you don't want a player loading into your game for the first time and then having to wait for it to recharge, because that'd be, boring. You want to set up the initial deposit, so say it'd be 5. Recharge rate, units per day. You want to make sure that you set this up. Now, a little bit more can be found on this within the documentation. It's just an optional field if you want them to be granted to the player. But you got to remember that it's evenly distributed over a 24-hour period. So if you want it to be specific over a 24-hour period, then that's great. Otherwise, it's probably not too good. And then recharge maximum, this is the max amount that the player can reach. So say if they start with 5, but actually the max they can have is 10, you want to set this to 10. But if they start with 5 and only ever maximum of 5, you need to make sure you set this to 5. Now, obviously, for now, I'm going to leave these as 0 because our virtual currency is just a currency. It's just coins. It has nothing to do with any of the deposit or recharge rate. Obviously, if you wanted your game to start off with an initial deposit, so say if they start the game and they already have 100 of your virtual currency, then great, give them that. It can entice players to play your game if you already give them a bit of currency to start off with, especially if the currency can be used to upgrade something that's useful or buy something that would give them a massive advantage. Talking more of mobile games here, on PC games, maybe it can unlock new stuff or buy them skins or anything along that sort of thing. If you automatically give them a little bit towards it, they might be more willing to actually buy the currency because they know that they're already like a halfway there towards it, or they might already use it to test. So they might already say, oh well, this is a little bit, I'm going to use this. If it works out good, I'm gonna buy some more currency and upgrade it. So you want to keep an eye on that, and you always want to make sure that that's the best that you can do for your players. Now, obviously, you can change this further down the line, but this is more economy balancing, which might come further on down in your game. For now, we're just going to save our currency and have it as 0. So we've successfully created our first virtual currency. So then, back in the catalog, if we go to test and then into our item, we're just going to set up a couple of things. So we're going to call this test item. And then in here, we're just going to leave it as my first item and my first item test item. We're going to ignore all the classes and stuff. We're just going to make it stackable. We're going to ignore tradable and limited edition because we don't really care too much about that. Now, in the prices, you can see now that PP has appeared. And we're going to set it to be, 1,000 of whatever PP is equivalent to. Now, again, this is probably more economy balancing of your team or of the game. That will come further down the line. That'll be how much is 1 PP worth in your in real currency in dollars. Now, the best way to probably do this is something in like a massive spreadsheet where you can value how much one virtual currency is worth in real money, and then figure out what your bundles can be, and then figure out what the prices of the items can be in regards to that. It can get quite complicated. However, having a good economy is probably something your game will want and probably be really grateful for, and the players will be grateful for as well. You don't want to charge too much, and then you don't want to charge too little. So getting it right can be key. So we're just going to save this item here. And then you can see here, it automatically updates here. This means that it's pretty much ready to go now. We can use this item in our calls. So obviously, if we wanted to have a look into bundles, first off, we're just going to create a couple of items. I'm literally just going to duplicate this item a couple of times, just so that we have a few of them. And there we go, we've just got 4 items. They're all the same, and it doesn't really matter. All I'm going to do is just quickly change this to 3, just so it's a little bit cleaner, that's all. And there we go, 4 items. So in bundles, you can now create a new bundle. Obviously, the bundle requires an item ID as well, and this has to be unique. So if it's a bundle that contains a specific thing, put the item and then put like _bundle after it. So we're going to put test bundle. Again, it has display name, so test bundle. And the description, again, test bundle. Again, it has all of the same different things as the items do. So the class, the tags, the images is stackable. You probably always want to make bundles and containers stackable by default. With items, sometimes you can not make them stackable. It just depends on what your item's for. I would always make bundles and containers that you can buy or win in the game stackable, because if there's a way of doing this within the game that the player can generate quite a few of them, you don't want them taking up space in the inventory, especially when you use things like get in the inventory and it returns each one individually. It could get pretty messy. Again, you have a little warning down here to say that the bundle is like an item that will be in the player's inventory. You recommend that you make it consumable so that it goes away after a little bit of time. So, even though the bundle unpacks the items, the bundle could then sit in the player's inventory and do nothing. So you probably want to make it consumable so that even once it's deposited all of the items that it contains within the bundle, it then removes itself because it will consume itself. And again, you probably want to set it to something like 3 seconds. Now, in here you have the currency option again for the bundle. Now, you probably want to again work this out in an economic sheet somewhere to ideally gather up what's actually being sold to the player and try and give them a good deal. Now, it's up to you whether you want to use virtual currency or real money for this. So if we set it to real money, we'll just put in 1999, 1999 basically in dollars, and then that'll be the price of it. Then add in contents to the bundle. You simply go to add to bundle, and this is where we're going to look into some of the different things now. In here, you can say that we have 3 tabs. We have items, which is just a list of all of our items specifically within the catalog that we are in. Again, if you want to add items from a different catalog, this will not work. Currencies just displays the virtual currencies that are available in the game. All you have to do is click add, and then in the bundle contents here, you'll be able to set exactly how many of said virtual currency you give to the player. This can be useful if the player wants to buy an item and a currency within a bundle, like a starter package maybe, and you want to reward the player with both. We're currently not going to do that. And again, drop tables, which we'll get into shortly, is a good way of setting up something like a card game where you buy the card packs, and within that pack you get a random set of cards. That is useful, and we'll cover that shortly, but again, it's not quite useful for the test bundle that we're just going to show. We're just simply going to add a couple of items in. So, as you can see here, it's added in our 2 items. This is where the ID and display name are quite useful to not get confused. As you can see, this doesn't really help us by both having my first item. So you want to make sure that you name them properly. Here you can set the number of quantity of the item that you are giving to the player. If you ever want this to be more than 1 for the item, always make sure it's stackable. Otherwise, you'll end up with multiple versions of it. Unless it's a very specific case where you don't want it to stack. There are a couple examples of this in other games where it doesn't stack. However, you probably want it to stack in order to save space. Again, we just need to make sure that it's a consumable. Sometimes this can get undone, especially when you add in the contents or accidentally close or save it without updating it properly. And there we go. Now, you probably don't want to add anything to custom data again because this is a bundle, so it will get confusing with the items that are in here. Like, you don't want to add in custom data for each item within the bundle. It could get very confusing. So for now, we're just going to save our bundle. And there we go. We have our test bundle. It shows us here that it's consumable and that which items are in it. Now, if you have a big bundle, it will show you all of the items. It'll be like a giant table, and it can get a little bit hard to read, but it does show you all the ones that are in there, which can be useful if you're checking off things. So then, let's hop across to containers. Now, containers are a bit different to bundles. Bundles you can automatically set up and have them automatically deposited into the player's inventory. This is better if they buy something, it just contains multiple items. Now, containers are best used for things like chests that require a key to open them. This is because they are set up slightly differently than bundles. You can see here that some of the things are the same, so like the item ID, the display name, description, all the other like things like class tags, all the options like it's stackable, tradable. Now, there is unlocked container and locked container as well as the consumable time. Now, the best way to look at this is actually to search it up within the API documentation, and as you can see here, there's a couple of things on consuming keys and containers and variable options. So we're just going to walk through this because it's slightly different than bundles. Now you can have the container durable, so that the container's always there, and when they find the item, say like a key, they can open it because it takes away the key. There is an option where it takes away both, where you need the key and the chest, and once you have both and you use it, it takes away both of the items. There is one that requires none, so you can set it up so it just automatically unlocks and consumes straight into the player's inventory. That's probably not the best though, because it can create infinite loops, and obviously with the player's inventory having a max of about 1,000, you probably don't want to have that. It is available, and I'm sure you can probably get it through some settings using this unlock container. However, I'd highly recommend it. If you're going to use that, use a bundle. And then there is a fourth option where the key is durable and the chest is consumable, so you always have the key, and when you find the chest, you use the chest and the key always stays. This highly depends on your game. You might not need this at all. This is something that only a few games really need. Most of the time you're probably going to want to use bundles. But if we were going to set one up, which I'm going to do now, we're just going to use a very simple test for it. So test container. I'm going to make this one consumable, so it automatically disappears. I'm going to make it stackable. Just add in a couple of items to it. Again, within containers you can add bundles, so obviously you can imagine that if you had a container that contains, say, a few bundles or even currencies or drop table, it can get pretty big, which is why you probably want to use these for very special things. So when the player has worked hard and got, say, like a big gold key that unlocks the gold chest, and in the gold chest there has, you know, quite a few items in it, you probably want something like that. You don't want to use it if you just want basically what a bundle does. You just want to use a bundle in that case. Now this is where it's slightly different. Again, you can have unlock container, but it likes to kick up a fuss. So if I was to just then save this as using real money and set it to 19.99 and try and save, it would kick up a fuss saying that it's basically, it can be opened infinitely, which you don't really want. So if we go to locked container, and then you can have a specific item that unlocks it. So this is where you'd set up a key in just your basic items. We're just going to pretend that the fourth test item number 3, is our key, and we're going to select that. So that means that if you have both this container and test item 3 in your inventory, then you can unlock the container. But with the container automatically being consumed, and because we set up the item as durable, the key will always remain, which means that you do need to make sure that this is an item that you've set up that probably is consumable if that's what you need. Again, this is something that's very specific to the game and probably quite a lot of games won't use. So just make sure that you're using it correctly. As you can see here, it likes to give warnings for the different approaches to what you can have. So this container could be open indefinitely or not at all, because the item that we set up was a durable key. So the key could exist forever, so you could either open it up or not at all. The containers and the warnings are there for your benefit, really. So because our key is durable, I'm just going to make this durable just so that we can save it. Again, though, as you can see now, they're both able to be opened indefinitely. So containers are a lot of work to try and get working, and it can cause quite a lot of issues where things won't work properly. So, you know, you might have to come into here and make, say, like a key and make it consumable within 3 seconds once it's used. Make it stackable, all this sort of stuff. Oh, more than 2, sorry, so that's got to be 3. So just come in here and make a quick key, then hop back to your container and make sure that the key for the locked is actually the key, so that then they're both consumable, so then you can actually save it. And even then, you know, look, this is a time consumable container with a time consumable key. it's a lot of hard work to get the containers working, and as I've found, it's probably not good to use them, because it's quite hard just to get them working, and even then, because of the way they work, you could have a player open them infinitely or not at all, and then that could cause a lot of problems in your game. If you are going to do this, make sure that you try and get them set up correctly so that it doesn't go crazy, where the player could continuously look and find an item that could then open up a key and all that sort of stuff. As you can see now, we've got it working, but again, it's probably just better to use bundles unless your game specifically requires this, and again, it's quite hard to get set up. So let's move on to our drop tables. Now, the drop tables are adjacent. Remember, the catalog is adjacent, that you can create the JSON yourself or edit it and upload the JSON. So this is basically a JSON within a JSON that you can do, but most of the time, because of how specific it is, you probably want to do it within Playfab. It's just a lot easier. So we'll create a new drop table. We'll call this test drop table. And then the drop table contents are here. So we'll add in a few items. So say we have 4, and I don't know, maybe we'll put in the bundle as like a top prize. Now, here is where it's different. This is a drop table. This is all to do with random chances, which is good again for things like card games with packs that want to open up cards that have a random chance of giving a said card. This would probably contain, in games like that, about 20 to 30 different items. And each of those items would have different weights. Now, as you can see, if everything has a weight of 1, all the odds are separated evenly. So everything here with our 5 items has a 20% chance of giving you said item. But if we change that weight, say maybe if we change this to a weight of 2, you can see now that this has a chance of like a 33, so 1 in 3 chance of dropping, but everything else only has a 1 in, I don't know, what is that, 1 in 8 chance of dropping. So it can change quite drastically, like just with one number. And then for the top prize, say like the bundle, you probably don't want to have it as a whole number. You probably want to have it as like a half or like a really small number. And as you can see here now, it's only got a 9.091% chance of dropping. That is incredibly low. Or you could even get like even smaller. So you'll probably find that some of like the legendaries or like, you know, the very top ones, they have a chance of being dropped in even the smallest of chests or drop tables or anything like that in games. But they'll probably have something like this set up so that it has like a 0.02% chance of dropping. It's technically still there. You could still technically get it, but the chances of getting it are so rare and so unlikely that it's just not possible. And as you can see, it's automatically updating the rest of the drop table so that everything else matches. Now, as you can imagine, with like quite a few items, this can get pretty long, and the odds can get pretty random and pretty similar for a lot of items that contain the same thing. This, I would probably say, unless your game calls for it and you have a random chance of winning the prize, I would stay away of, mainly because of quite a lot of countries. And I speak from experience here from working in the past, a lot of countries now have a lot of new laws that require odds to be shown to the players. Now, what this means is that you have to physically, for every single prize that's available in a drop table or in like a random chance thing, it has to be shown to the player somewhere what the chances are of getting that reward. Now, depending on your country, you might not need to do this, but if you plan your game to go to other countries, this might be needed for that country. And if you have like several hundred items in drop tables, you could need a massive list on a UI just to give the chances of whatever the items are that could drop in your drop tables. And this could create a hell of a lot of work for you just to simply get it up to legal standards. And obviously you don't want to get in trouble for having problems, especially legally, to do with random chances of a game in trouble. As you've, like, over the last couple of years, you've probably seen other companies, especially bigger companies, get in trouble for this. So it's something that you probably want to try and avoid if you can. If your game requires it, make sure that you get everything right and that all of it's documented somewhere so that you can always refer to it at a different date without having to log into Playfab to make sure that everything is up to scratch with the odds of the items that the player can receive. Now, I'm not discouraging you from using it if you don't want to, but just make sure that everything is set up. As you can see here, though, there is an error with the fact that I have used a weight with the basically decimals. Playfab only requires normally whole numbers, so you'd probably need to change these to be something like, crazy amounts to try and get the numbers that you're looking for. The drop table Playfab documentation that is found online, it can actually be pretty useful for stuff like this. They go through, the different weights of stuff and how to try and get the numbers that you need, and also, how to set up the drop table properly and do the calls through C#. Obviously, they use Unity or C# as their base language, but you do need to make sure that, again, all of this stuff is legally done and pretty much written down somewhere. Now, once it's done, it will show you the percentage chances of getting the prizes within the contents. Again, if this is pretty big, it will create quite a big one, and you can create quite a few drop tables in here for different ones. Say, like, if you have a common chest, and that gives you, a random chance of any of the items out of here, then you have like a bronze, and then a medium, and then a gold chest, or anything like that. So you can create different ones. Now, if you wanted one that gives you something multiple of them, you'd probably have to call it multiple times, but that's specifically down to you. Now, the last thing that we need to look into is stores. Now, stores are basically a way of showing multiple items on a UI if you have a store that probably changes, or if you have something where you want to offer the player an offer. Say, like, once a day, a certain item will go on offer, and this is probably the best way to do that, because within a store, when you add a contents in, say, like, if we just add in our first test item here, you can see that it has the original price here in smaller for the virtual currency. Again, if you're using real money, it'll have the real money price there, and then this allows you to override that price. So then you could put in, say, like 500. Now, you could then create some sort of UI that says, 50% off, and you could really exaggerate to the player just how much money they're getting off this item, but it's only available for that day. And then obviously that'll then try and entice the player to buying it. So if you want any sort of offers on that you don't want to have to do, you don't want to have to create loads of different items for, you probably want to set up a store for it. So that's, it's another example of a way of setting up an automatic store that changes day by day that gives the player an offer. Now, as well as that, you can also, within stores, set up segment overrides. So you could literally set up different things for different segments. Basically, what this means is you could give an offer, or you could give the item to the, say, like, payers. You could give them the item, but maybe knowing that they've paid for items before, maybe increase or decrease the price of it, change the price of it, or maybe like week 2 active players, players that have been playing the game for a couple of weeks now, give them a good offer, give them something that they're going to want to buy, or maybe create a new segment, which we'll cover in another series, and allow players who have come back to the game for the first time in 2 weeks, or brand new players that have just started the game, make sure that the item that's in the store for them is cheap and is something that they'll turn around and say, oh, actually I want to buy that because it's so cheap. Other players aren't going to know what you're offering it for unless they're sitting side by side each other, which is very unusual. But this is more for mobile side of games. Obviously, PC games, you probably don't want to do this. But for mobile games, you'll probably find that quite honestly, quite a lot of mobile games will run different offers depending on the players that are playing on them. Simply because they're trying to get players to carry on playing the game. And sometimes that requires lowering the price a little of items that other players might receive for a different price. So this is where you do that sort of thing. You'd make sure that players that have just come back to the game, or players that have continued playing the game and you want to continue playing the game, you're giving them good offers to try and make sure that they're enticed to stay in the game. So we're just going to quickly create this as well. Test store. Store again. This the store stuff, because it's a collection of items and doesn't it, like, this isn't something that you buy. This is something that is used for us back end. So me and you. This is something that's set up for us. Because of that, there is nothing that we need to worry about in the sense of what is shown to the player on the Steam pop-up, for example, because they can't ever buy this. This is just a load of data that is stored for people like us, for the developers, in order to set up different things for their players. So you don't ever have to worry about, store name or description in this sort of stuff, because it'll never ever be shown. Now, do make sure that you're careful with some of this, because if you add in a new item, and obviously it defaults to 0, make sure you set it, unless you want to give away an item for free, which you probably don't want to do, and can happen accidentally because obviously it is automatically set to 0. Always make sure that you set it and then click away from it to make sure that it's set properly. Otherwise you could find yourself giving away items. Now, the only other thing as well is that all of this data that we've just covered, all of the stuff here, so the items, the bundles, the containers, the drop tables and the stores, once you have used these in live, you should not change them. Once they are in the live game and they are in circuit, try not to change these at all, especially the drop tables, unless there's a bug, unless there's a problem with it where for some reason one of the entries in drop table has been set to 0. Try not to change any of this stuff, because this will affect the live game. Any of these items or any of the bundles, containers and stores that are being used currently, they will affect the game. They will if players have spent money to buy something and then it's changed overnight, they will complain. They will demand their money back. They will uninstall the game because they don't want to be cheated. So unless there is a major bug in your coding somewhere that means that a drop table chance in here has a 0% or something to drop, unless that happens, try not to change anything. Otherwise, you could find yourself in a lot of issues. Again, that being said, make sure that all of your data, before you even consider putting any of the stores live or anything like that, make sure it's all fine. Do a lot of test backend. Make sure that everything's working. Through Playfab, you can enable the Sandbox mode for Steam. It probably automatically hooks up as well for some of the other ones. Like, I know that Android has like a sandboxy mode, and I'm pretty sure iOS does as well. I can imagine that probably most platforms do. Because we automatically set up our game to run on Steam, it automatically gave us the option for Steam. So you probably want to make sure that you have it enabled if you want to do testing. So set up your store, set up the items, get it working in game, get everything hooked up correctly, then try and purchase it through Steam. Like, go through the entire purchase process to make sure that the sandbox mode is working. But not only that, make sure that the player receives the item, make sure that the virtual currency is taken off the player if they're using virtual currency. Now, obviously, you are going to need to have a callback for Steam in order to make sure, specifically for Unreal Engine in this case, to have the microtransaction succeeded or proceed passed back through to the engine. This isn't something that is there by default. You can find some examples on this online. There is some C++ examples online for it. It is possible to do, and there is online somewhere. Someone has created like a plugin for it, or you can probably find one on the marketplace. But it needs to basically look for the Steam microtransaction functions. Otherwise, you might you can get all the way through, and then you'll find out that it didn't receive it, and nothing happens, even though the player's money has been taken from their Steam account. Now, if this happens, you could get into a lot of trouble for taking Steam money, people's real money, and not giving them anything in return because the game isn't getting the callbacks correctly. This has been an issue for smaller games in the past, so you need to make sure that you get this up and running before any of this. So I'd always recommend enabling the sandbox and making sure that you can go through the entire process. Not only that, but go through some of the process and then cancel. Go through a little bit further and then cancel. Making sure that every single time you have an error message that pops up on screen that tells the player they cancelled their transaction, they cancelled their purchase, the purchase was failed, something along those lines, just so that the player knows what's happened. Now, this is obviously not as big on Steam, because obviously, you know, you're on the PC, you can see that it didn't go through because there's an overlay, but on things like Android and iOS, you can enable one-touch purchasing. So obviously, you know, if something goes wrong, they need to know about it, because as soon as they click buy, they're expecting it to just instantly go through. If it takes their money and nothing happens, you know, you could end up in a lot of trouble for this. So always go through the sandbox mode and make sure that every single step of the way you have a variation for something. You know, they started the process and then cancelled. They didn't even get the Steam overlay. They get to the Steam overlay, cancel. Then they get to the Steam overlay. They tried to purchase, but obviously there's not enough money in their account. Most of the not enough money in account will probably be handled by Steam. But any instance where they go back to the game from the Steam overlay pop up, you need to make sure that that there's something in place. And then even then, if they go all the way through, they purchase the item. Say if you've actually got the microtransaction listener in on Steam, that is there when you need to put up a UI to show the player, hey, you've successfully purchased this, and then show them what they've purchased. This is a big feedback to the player to make sure that they know what they've actually purchased and that it has gone through properly and that you've given them the item. Now that we've got all of that out of the way, we can simply look at the player's inventory. So we'll go across to our player and inventory. Now, any time that the player gets an item, it will show up here, whether it be a bundle or a container, a single item, a virtual currency, anything like that. It'll all show up within here. Now, you can also, by default, it will just show the active items, but you can also show the expired, revoked, and stacked items. Expired ones are normally ones where it's consumed itself. Revoked is more like of an error, where like either you have taken the item off them for whatever reason or something didn't go through. And then stacked, obviously, is stacked items. You can also grant items to the user. So this is good if you want to test the UI side of your game in order to make sure that the inventory updates correctly, or that something's working properly. So you can just make sure it's you, make sure it's yourself that you're giving it to. Don't accidentally give it to a player, and probably don't do this whilst you've got players on. Make sure this is working beforehand. But simply select the catalog and then select the item. Say key. Actually, not key because it's consumable. I'll set it to the first one, and then grant the item. And then obviously you can see here it's active, which means I have it. Uses left is more to do with the stackable side of things, and the consumable. If it's just a durable item like this is, it will always just show one as uses left. You don't really need to worry about that too much because it's not going anywhere unless somehow you can use this item, say like in a container, which would be really weird. But yeah, this basically just shows that this player now has this item, and whenever we do a call to Playfab in order to get the user's inventory, it will return this item as being in the player's inventory. So now that we've set up basic stores and all the items and the virtual currency, and we've also just given ourselves a test item in our player's inventory just to be on the safe side, we're now going to go through the actual cloud scripts and the API calls within the engine in order to make sure that everything's working as it should be. Now again, I'm not going to go and create a load of UI just to show these test examples. It would take a long time to create like a fully working inventory system that unfortunately I don't have. Again, this is probably just for yourself. You will probably already starting to think about this. If you're at this point where you're watching this anyway, you're probably already starting to think about an inventory system for your game, and you'll probably already have something that you can start to hook up. So that'll be a lot easier. All I'm going to do is make sure that the cloud scripts return everything we need, show the items, log the info of the player that we're updating, and the inventory of the player. Then within the engine, make sure that it shows us by logs what the virtual currency is that the player has, what the items are that they have, what the store items are. So, like, if we're looking at a store, what items are available for us to buy, all that sort of stuff. And again, just quickly, inside of inventory, you can see here, and in virtual currency, you can see that it has our virtual currency and the amount that we currently have. I'm just going to quickly award myself a few currency, just so that we can see it in game. Again, this is more of an admin thing that is good for just testing. So you can see here, you can add or subtract it, like the reason and comment. Now, this can also be useful if something, say, was to go wrong, and you can verify that they tried to buy something and you have the money and it's gone out of their account and all that sort of stuff, but for some reason something happened on Playfab, maybe the servers went down or something like that, I mean, there should be backups for this anyway, but just to be on the safe side, you can actually come into here and give them currency. Most of the time, you'll probably find that this is given for something, like a community side of thing, like a reward for being a good member of the community, or like on the Facebook page of a game, you could have like a competition, and if they win, their account gets 1,000 gold or something like that. This can be useful because you can simply put in here competition winner, something like that. Ignore the spelling. Comment 1,000 gold or whatever, and then you can just put it in and save, and then whenever anything happens now, inside of data, you should be able to find this sort of data. Like whenever whenever this data gets updated on Playfab, there should be something somewhere that says, why this player got this amount of currency, what was the reason, all that sort of stuff. So you can look into it just to make sure, but this is an admin thing. You can't call this in game, obviously. You can't just add or subtract virtual currency from within the game. Now, you can set the setting of Playfab to allow clients to do this, but it highly recommends, and I highly recommend, not doing this, because this could allow easily for hacking. You don't want to allow clients to be able to update their own virtual currency, otherwise you could end up players walking around with 100 trillion gold just buying everything in the store. Yeah, it's something you don't want to do. You always want to make sure that Playfab handles anything to do with virtual currency, whether it be buying, adding, subtracting, or anything to do with that. You want to make sure that Playfab handles it. And obviously we're going to go through now in the cloud scripts and in the engine API to make sure that you understand exactly how it's done. So let's get started with that. So then let's start by looking at the engine. Now, I did say that we'd probably do some of this inside the cloud script. However, just purely because of the way that it returns data, it can sometimes get a little bit messy in order to do it via cloud script compared to simply using the API calls that are already within the engine in order to do basic things. Now, I'm not saying that we want to do everything inside of the engine, but sometimes just returning or getting some of the information that is easy to do from within the engine is usually simpler. Like just reading the inventory of the user can just be simple to do from the engine, rather than having to physically call stuff through cloud script every single time. Now, obviously, you can, everything I'm going to show you that we do inside of the engine can be done within cloud script as well, and it might be a little bit better, but the way that I've done it myself in the past is doing it through the engine. So that is the way that we're going to start by looking at. So we're going to jump across to the project and jump into our game instance file, and then we're going to start off by creating a custom event, and then we're going to call that first off, I think we're going to do the player inventory. So we're going to put get player inventory. Then off of this, we're going to do get user inventory. Again, you want to call the client one, not the admin one. And then let's make our request. Now, the request for this doesn't need anything because it knows the Playfab API player ID, because who else? You're not going to call user inventory for anyone else other than yourself, so there's no point passing it through. Obviously, in the cloud script, you probably do have to pass it through. I believe that you do actually have to drag out and make this request like this, otherwise it might cause some issues. So it's usually best just to have that. Then let's just create our success inventory, and then failed inventory. And then again, just hook up our fail so that we have any errors that happen. Now then, off of the success is results, but as a structure. So we drag this off, and then inside of here you can see that we have multiple things. Now, with get user inventory, it also returns the virtual currency of the player, as well as the virtual currency recharge time, which obviously, unless you're doing it, you don't really need to worry about. So in order to update the virtual currency of the player, you need to get user inventory. So it not only allows you to get the inventory of the player, but also the virtual currency. So when you initially log into the game, this is something you want to call. You want to call get user inventory, because then you can display the virtual currency the player has and the inventory that the player has. Now, it's usually best to save these as variables, so you can have inventory and then virtual currency, or VC, and then you can simply have these inside of here so that it is easier to update. Now, this is easier to do if you have multiple locations for things to be called. You can just call the game instance file and gather the user inventory and the virtual currency that way. If you just have a one place and it's only updated on and startup, then it is probably better. Oh, and as well, it would never ever change, which obviously these two will. Then you should just hook it straight up into here, like get the UI that you're going to hook it up into and hook it up directly, and then do all of the conversion within that blueprint. With things like virtual currency and user inventory that are going to change constantly, it's best to save them so that every single time that you call get user inventory, which I would always recommend you do after the player purchases something, or, you know, if they purchase virtual currency or purchase any sort of item in the game, no matter what it is, always update get user inventory, because it'll always update the virtual currency and the inventory for the player. And then if you want, then you could then hook up off of this an update call in your UIs to make sure that it updates anything that happens, especially for updating text of the virtual currency. So then, what we're going to do first is hook up the virtual currency so that we can see what virtual currency the player actually has. Now, obviously, if you're going to hook this up in game, I'd say directly hook it up to exactly where you want it to be, or like, you know, a text field, and have that anywhere in the UI. Just get it hooked up as a very basic UI, which, to be honest, might be quite simple if we just do it ourselves. Just simply, you know, it's not going to mean anything, and we're just going to call it VC text. You know, just have it set up so that no matter what, you can just drag this anywhere you need it to, but it will still update. Because, you know, if you just do it as a log, or if you put it in somewhere and then delete it, you can always end up causing issues. I'm sure you guys know this anyway. You know, if you're looking into using Playfab within Unreal, you're probably already past the basics of Unreal. So it should be no surprise, really, to some of this stuff. But because we already call the UI that we're hopefully going to use, we already add it as soon as the player controller gets added, and then, you know, the connection to Playfab happens afterwards. What we'll do is we'll call the get user... Actually, no, we'll call it off the connection to Playfab. So normally off the connection to Playfab, this is where you want to call anything that should be done on startup. Obviously, I know in ours at the moment we have a 5-second delay and then it calls it. That's just simply, you know, to allow it time to connect and stuff, because we haven't got anything else in the game, and, you know, we connect to it pretty damn fast because there's, you know, the game starts up because there's nothing in it. We have no content, we have nothing to load, you know, nothing's there. But most of the time, you should always make sure that the game connects with Playfab before you try to make any of these calls. Otherwise, it could cause loads of issues with, you know, either if Steam's down, obviously it's not going to do anything anyway, so it's not entirely problematic. But if you do connect to Steam, but there's something wrong with your Playfab connection, or something wrong with Playfab itself, then obviously it's still going to try and make all these API calls, and then obviously the server can get upset and, you know, moan at you for making requests to the server when it doesn't need to, and all this sort of stuff. So it's usually better just to do it straight away. So the best way to do this is probably just to get the player... actually, let's create a simple function and just call it, let's see, custom event init functions. And then inside of here, we're going to simply get the controller of the player, because there's only one player anyway, so it doesn't matter. Most of the time, if you're doing this inside of a main menu, there's only ever, unless you're like, you know, unless you're doing something with servers within the main menu, there's only ever going to be one player within the main menu. So getting player controller 0 should always be fine if it's for the main menu, which will most likely be on the init functions anyway. Now, further down the line, whenever you come to connecting stuff within the game, and if it's on a different map and it uses a different controller, obviously that can get a little bit more complicated, but you should already have access, like, you know, you should already have stuff saved to the game instance in order to update that sort of stuff anyway, but for now, it shouldn't matter too much. And then, obviously, inside of here, we will just simply create a variable that's called UI, or main menu UI, off of here. So, main menu UI. Now, don't worry about this too much, guys. You don't really need to do this. This is just me setting up some stuff in order to make sure that I can display the data that I want to show you. Most of the time, you'll already have all of this stuff by now already hooked up anyway, so you should just be able to, you know, be able to grab, like, your main menu UI, which should have, you know, a text string in it already, just in order to make sure that everything's fine. It should already exist for you, pretty much. I'm only doing this because it's a test project and there's nothing in it that I'm having to create it all from scratch anyway. So, within here, we now have our VC and our inventory. And then, because this is being called straight away, hopefully, if we set it up correctly, which we just need to simply, there we go, get player inventory. It should already start to call this as soon as it connects to Playfab. Actually, no, we did say that we were going to put it in our init. So we need to call the init functions instead. Init function. And then put that inside of here. They get player inventory. Now, most of the time with these, you're probably going to want to have something happen on the callback. This is simply because the callback can take a second, well, up to a second normally, in order to respond when you've made the call. And obviously, if you have something happen immediately after you've made the call, it won't have updated already, especially when it comes to things like virtual currency and inventory, which you know you probably want to be accurate. You want to make sure that these happen after the call's actually been made. So what we're going to do is we're just going to simply copy that and bring it down here. So once the call's been made, we're saving it. We're getting the main menu. Then we'll get the VC text. Then we're going to want to simply do a set text. And then off of the actual VC, you need to get number field. And the easiest way to do this is just to get field names and hook up the first one into there. This is just simpler than having to, especially when it's your first time using it, having to go through all the field names in order to find out exactly what's there. Now, there are some other things within here that you can find that aren't really needed by yourself or by anyone really, but they're still returned with the data. Again, I would probably recommend doing this within your main menu UI to keep everything clean, just to update it. I'm only doing this simply because I want to show you it working straight away. And because we're, after this, we're not going to really keep this going. Now, obviously, at the moment, it's a float. I'm just going to leave it as that. Most of the time, you'll probably use an int rather than a float, so make sure you truncate it in Engine in order to show. But now, if we play, it'll wait 5 seconds, connect to Playfab, launch the initial functions, which will get player inventory, which calls obviously get user inventory, and then off of here, it will find the inventory in VC, and then it will set the text of the VC. So hopefully all the virtual currency should be shown. So let's just give this a quick run. Obviously, again, make sure that you have Steam running and all the other things that go along with launching the game, and make sure that you launch it as a standalone. And then hopefully we should see it running. Now, after this, we're going to go through the inventory side of things. Like, we're going to get the hook up the actual inventory to make sure that we're seeing the inventory of the player. We're also going to look at stores, and then we'll go over a couple of other things. Now, it might be simpler once we've gone over the basics to just show you it all completed, because there is a lot of different functions that can happen in it that you'll need further down the line, and it will take a lot of time to go into some of them. But we'll see how it goes. And then hopefully go from there. Now, obviously, the stores are quite an important part of anyone's game. So you need to make sure that it's done correctly. One problem that I did just notice that we've accidentally done is we've put up these init functions, as I just said, not to put something as soon as it's called. I literally just hooked up the init functions to the connect playfab, so it didn't even have time to return with the success for connect. You need to hook up these onto the actual success event called from Playfab, so then it can go through. Otherwise, it's going to try and call things that don't even exist. So let's try that again. So then, hopefully now, we should see the connect success log come up. There we go. So, and there we go. The text has changed to 500. So if you remember correctly, we actually added 500 currency to our player. So now you can see that the virtual currency is actually hooked up correctly. Now, anytime that you need to update this, you just need to call the update user inventory and then make sure that it updates the text. So now that that's working, we can set to work on our inventory system. So for this, all I'm going to do is get it to print out the logs. I'm not going to hook anything up to the UI because obviously an inventory system is quite a bit of work, and I'm not going to do that just to show you the one inventory piece working. But the easiest way to just see that the player's actually got inventory is off of this, we're just going to simply make a sequence node here so that we can see. So just in case one fails, the other one will carry on, and then we'll leave all of this on the first. Then on the second, we're going to just do a for each loop of the inventory, so the inventory that our user currently has. And then off of the JSON object, we're simply going to do get field, and then in here we're going to put item ID. Now again, you could just do get field names and have a look yourself at each of the field names that exist by printing out the string of each of them or looking up at the documentation online. The easiest ones that you should know are item ID, item class, and a couple of others that we'll get to shortly. But then off of this, all we then need to do is put it as string and then simply print out this. So this will basically mean that it will go through our user inventory if there's any there, and if there is something there, it will get the field of the item ID, which I believe ours is something like item 1 or something basic, test item 1. It'll then just print the string of it. This is just a very rudimentary basic example that shows that that we have successfully got the data for the user that the user that's playing the game. It's got the inventory and it shows that the player has an inventory and it's printed the item. What you do with it from there is down to you. You can hook up all sorts of UI systems just by using this data. So you just need to make sure that you're getting the inventory correctly. And that's all that I'm showing you here, is that we can successfully get the user inventory that we're looking for and then the item ID. Now, if you want to get something specific for that item, you might need to change or look at the shop it was bought from. Did you see there then? It came up with test item, so it is successfully finding our inventory. That means that the player inventory system is working. It, you know, the shop item has been given to the player and everything's working. Now, obviously, again, you can hook up any sort of systems you want in order to show the user what items they actually have. But for now, that's all we're going to touch on the inventory, because we know that the player has the inventory. It's there. You know, it's working. Now, if we go to our next one, all we're going to do here is do custom event, get store, and then all we're going to do on this one is we're going to get the store items for a certain catalog. So this would be useful if you're going to have stores that rotate in and out. Obviously, you know, you can just display every single item if you want. Say if you're on a mobile game and you don't have many items, then you could just get the items of the catalog by doing get catalog items like this. And all you need to do there, I believe, is just pass through the catalog version, so the catalog name, and then it will get every single catalog item. This is useful, again, for mobile games if you only have a couple of items and you don't really want to create a store because nothing's ever going to change. But most of the time I would recommend having store items that come in and out if you want things to rotate. If you want the player to be able to buy every single item in the game no matter what or when, then again use get catalog items. But if you want to have on that system, if you want to have a front page with certain items on it to display like promos or important items that have just been released due to, I don't know, an event happening, then create a store for it. They're both set up similarly and they'll both return kind of similar data. Again, catalog version and store ID will be what we set up in here. So if we just quickly come across to our economy, so our catalog is just called test, and then our store is just called test store. So if we just hook them up into here like this, test store, this will return all the data we need. So again, if you want to use stores, then you use get store items. If you just want to have every single catalog item, then use get catalog item. So for now, let's just hook up the success store and failed store. And then again, hook up our failed onto here, just so that we know if anything goes wrong. Now, off of this results, you can see here that it does return the catalog version. This is, you could always do like a double check just to make sure that you're reading the correct one. However, the thing that we want most out of this is the store array. This is all of the items that are in the store. So if you have a certain store that's active, you probably want to set this to a like active store variable, just so that you can then get all of the store items that are currently there and then display them in the UI. Now on the get catalog one, if we just quickly create the custom event just to show you the success, it is very similar, however it's just catalog instead. Now these just have the exact same like they contain the same data basically. This is just the specific store, whereas this is the entire catalog. So you could just hook it up directly into that, like so, and then all of the calls, all of the field names, everything like that we are going to show in a second, they're all exactly the same. So it depends on what you want to do with your store basically and what you want. So all you need to worry about is the get catalog items and the get store items depending on what you need. Again, we're going to stick with our store items just because we set up the store, and I mean, we could use this, but it's exactly the same, so it doesn't really matter too much. Now, once we have the store items, we are going to simply just print out some of the values that we are looking for, just to show that the store is actually being grabbed correctly from Playfab. So we're just going to put in a print here and put store success. Then we're going to do a for each loop of the active store items. And then inside of here, again, we're just going to do get field. And then in here, we're going to put item ID. Now again, there's quite a few field names. You could just do get field names in order to see what they all are. But the most usable ones are item ID, catalog version. I believe you can get item class. You might not be able to, but I think you can get item class from it. So we're just going to then put as string and then do a print string here. And then this will simply print string the item ID of the items that are in that store. Now, how you go about displaying it is down to you, but all of the information that you'll need is now contained within here. It will just simply have each item that you need to show. What's best is to have the Playfab side of things and then your side of things. So the Playfab data that's being read through, try and have something in the engine that you can relate to that. Maybe put it in, maybe have something that's directly the same ID name as the store in Playfab, and have something in like a data table in Unreal that has the exact same name, so that you can then find it within that data table and then contain all of the information, like its image, its name, all of that sort of stuff that you can then hook up to the UI. Obviously you can take, you can just read some of the things, like all of the stuff that's within the items in here, you can read them all, so you could just get display name from the item. However, when reading the store items, it's a little bit different, because obviously the store, if you get display name, or store name rather, it would return this one rather than the actual item. In order to get the individual item things, like display name of the item, then you will need to directly get the catalog item and compare them, and then if they're the same, then or find it within it and then simply get the store. That's probably the easiest way to compare them if you're looking for very specific things that only the item within the catalog contains rather than the store itself. Something else that we need to do as well inside the engine, once we've got the item ID, we then also need to get another field, hook it up, and then this one needs to be virtual currency prices. Now obviously the virtual prices can be, you can have multiple. You don't have to just put in one. You could have you could have a real value price like $19.99 in dollars, or it could be worth, I don't know, 3,000 gold. Yeah, you can put both of them in, and this will return it as an object, because obviously it's not just a set one value, it could be multiple. So it returns it as an object. Now, in order to then get the object, the best thing to do is just do get field names again, and then hook up the first one. So get field, and then hook up the field name to the first one. Now this is useful if you only have one VM. You could literally, like one virtual currency, you could literally just hook it up like this. If you had multiple, then you could simply do a for each loop off of the get field names, and then get each field for each individual one, and make sure that you display each virtual currency or each price of the item. But seeing as we've only got one for ours, we know that we've only got one, you could just do it like this. And then because obviously it's a currency, it means that it's as a number, not as a string. And then in here, we'll simply just put a print string and then print out the value of the cost of the item. So in here, we're just simply going through the item in the active store, gets the ID and prints it, gets the virtual currency price and prints it. This should be what you need in order to set up the basics of the store, because you know how much it's going to cost and its ID name. this is key in order to make the purchase request. So if we have a look at the purchase request within Playfab, or rather within the API in here, we're just going to make a custom event and call it purchase item. Now this is there are two different ways. You have the purchase item, which is the virtual currency way of paying for an item, and then you have the paying for an item with real money. Now obviously if an item has multiple methods of paying, you need to make sure that you split it out correctly to go to whichever is basically correct. Otherwise you could end up accidentally paying for a real value money, one with fake money. You need to just make sure that you make the right call. So if we're doing the virtual currency one, you drag off here and put purchase item. And it should be inside of the client. Yep, there it is. So this is the virtual currency option. Now there is a lot of options in here. So as you can see, there's the catalog, the character ID you don't need to worry about, but there's the item ID, which obviously we just got from our store. The catalog version, so what catalog it's coming from. I mean, we only have one, so we're just going to put in test anyway. The price of the item, the store ID, and the virtual currency. This all, apart from, character ID, you don't really need to worry about unless, as it says there, unique Playfab assigned ID for the character owned by the user. This is more to do with like an RPG or an MMORPG style of game, like World of Warcraft maybe, where you need to worry about specific items for specific characters created by the specific user. If it's just, if you're not doing that, don't worry about it. But the best thing to do is just simply create all of these onto the actual event itself, so that you can just simply pass them through. I mean, I would always hook up the catalog version as well, but obviously seeing as we've only got one, it doesn't matter too much. And right now, I think we're just going to get the first one. Like, we're just going to get active store, and then get the first one of it, because we only, we're just going to pass it through as a test, because we don't really care too much about it, to be honest. Because obviously we're not really buying the item. This is good for a quick test. But other than that, you don't really when it comes to a proper store, they'll click on the item that the UI will have all the data in that the player is buying, so it'll have the the name of the item, the price of it, the store ID, all of that sort of stuff. Just in order to get it working on our side, though, we're just going to simply, call this from here. So we're going to do purchase item, and then we're going to pass through the item ID, and then we're going to pass through the price of it, the store ID, which I don't really need to worry about. I mean, that is returned as well in, I believe it's in here. Yep, store ID. And then virtual currency. This is more one that you actually need to put in manually. So if you've only got one virtual currency, it doesn't really matter too much. If you've got multiple, then you need to make sure that you're connecting the correct one. But now this should call this. So we'll just hook up the on success, custom purchase item success, and then failed. Purchase item fail. Again, hook up our fail so that we know what's happening if there's any errors. And then off of this, there's an item of the details of the items that's purchased. Now you will use this to create a on success. So you've successfully purchased the items. Tell the player what they've bought, show them what they've bought so that they can verify that they've bought, that it's gone through. Now, in the error side of things, this is where you should hook up something to make sure that the player knows why something didn't go through. Whereas with all the others, they just print a string to tell us what the error name is. You should, in your UI, hook up something on this fail after it to make sure, that it actually happens. Hook up something to tell the player why it didn't go through. because most of the time it will be down to something like they don't have enough currency in order to buy the item, and that's it. But the player might not know that. The player might think they have got enough, or something else has gone wrong. You need to make sure that you tell the player what has gone wrong if anything's gone wrong. So always, especially in this instance, hook up something here to make sure you tell them. And we'll, for now, leave this empty because we're not too worried about the, like, I'm not going to show you the item details that we've purchased. I'm just going to simply put up a string here to say item success purchased, which means that then we should successfully have the item in our inventory, which is easy to confirm by just looking at our playfab. After this is where you then hook up all the stuff to the UI that you'd make. Maybe, I don't know, maybe offer the player to go to the inventory system once you have one created in order to see the new item they've purchased. If it's money, if they've purchased a virtual currency, make sure to let them know that, you know, something, you know, they've gained something. Make sure there's a sound effect, make sure there's a big particle effect, make sure that something happens. Now, obviously, you're not very often going to purchase virtual currency with virtual currency, so we're just going to quickly have a look at the proper way through the platform's use to get the like to buy something. Obviously, normally you would call as well. You'd call get user inventory at the end of this. We're not going to call that because otherwise it's just going to create an infinite loop, and then, you know, Unreal won't run. But normally at the any time that you've purchased an item here, this is where you would put get user inventory at the end to make sure that it calls this and updates anything that the player has done. Okay, now again, I'm not going to do this because it might cause issues, because we're simply just calling things, you know, straight after one another, which is probably what you wouldn't do in the initial game. But yeah, make sure that anytime the player anytime the player buys something, you update it. So then, getting and purchasing something through the platform is a little bit different. You have to obviously create a custom event. This is called start purchase for the platform, and then here we call start purchase. So this is telling it that you want to purchase items that are that consist like from an array. So you can purchase multiple items. This is useful if for some reason you have like a trolley system in your game where you can add loads of things to a cart and purchase them all at the end. Don't know why you do that, but you can do. It completely supports that. Again, catalog version, test, store ID. If you're purchasing from a store, this is optional. So if you went through a certain store in order to buy an item that was on offer, then this is where you'd put the store ID in, but it will pull the on offer value. If you want it to just use the base value, say if you have something that's not on offer and the player can still buy it, then leave this empty and it will pull the base item. It'll just pull the base one from this. And then if you're just using one item, you probably just want to pass through the item that you're purchasing. This will most likely be, again, virtual currency, depending on your game. But just make an array and pass it in because this requires an array. If you are making a game for some reason with like a trolley system where you can have loads and loads of different things, make sure that you probably have this as an array and pass straight into the array the items that you're purchasing. Then off of here, again, the fail. So let's do the fail first. Start failed, and then hook up the failure, and then on success. So success, start success rather. Then off of here, we have some interesting things that we need to look at. We have contents, which is just, again, the items that you're going to purchase. The order ID, now, this is a massive long string that is needed for verification by the platform. Payment option, this is just simply list of the options of way that the method that they can pay. Playfab does support other ways of paying, or rather they're going to. I don't know if some of them are actually up and running, but you know, you can, if you go to add-ons, you can see here that You know, there's a lot of different platforms that run, and there's even monetization methods. You know, you can put things through PayPal. So you need to make sure that you list whatever type of payment method the player is going to do through here, and make sure that it updates. Virtual currency balance. This is not really needed for proper ones. I mean, it says at the bottom there, current virtual currency totals for the user. This isn't really needed because this is going through the proper channel of it. Like, this is, you know, this is going through the platform basically. It might be needed for other things, but for this isn't really needed. Now the best way here for the payment options is to just encode wrong one. Just do a for each loop of it, and then encode the JSON, and then simply print that. That'll just print the whole load of JSON for this specific payment option. Sometimes it's better just to have something like this in, or, you know, getting the field names and printing them, just so that you can see, to make sure that all the payment options that you've listed are actually coming through correctly. You can just, you know, you can simply unhook these. They don't take very long to unhook, but, you know, for testing purposes, you need to make sure that all the option payments that you're selecting are coming through, and this is just a way of doing that. So then it's useful off of here, or off of completed, to hook up the item ID to just a print string to, you know, print again just for logs. Now the next bit is the most important bit. This is the pay for purchase function. So we need to create another function, and we'll put pay for purchase, and then call the pay for purchase client call, and then make the request. Again, this has quite a few things that we need to hook up. So in here we need the order ID, currency, provider name. The provider transaction ID is specifically required for Facebook payments. It might be required for other, you know, other ones that are like a little bit unusual, but it says here basically just required for Facebook payments. So if you're just using Steam, don't worry about it too much. Now, obviously, you'll hook up the pay for purchase here at the end, and again, you would hook up all of the info. So you know, currency, because we're using real money for this one, you just simply just put in RM to tell it that it's going to use real money. Provider name. Now, you can find a list of the provider names on Playfab, but seeing as we're using Steam, it will just simply be Steam. And then the order ID is this massive long string that we have here. So then, in here, we just need to hook up the failure and success. So, pay for, I'll just put pay failed, and then hook up the failure event so that we know of any errors. And then on success, again, pay success. Now, this is where things get a bit different. On the result here, you have a load of things that seem really good. You have, like, you know, the order ID, the provider data, the purchase currency, all that sort of stuff. We don't care about any of this to use as actual data. It's pretty useful to you know, have this as information that you can log. So we can put success purchase or something like that, and then you can hook up, you know, the order ID, the provider data, the purchase currency, the purchase price, all that sort of stuff. That's just useful for you during testing, which, you know, is pretty useful when you're doing your sandbox stuff, which you should be doing to test anyway. However, none of this really means anything, because at this point, especially when you're using Steam, we have to wait for the callback. Now, I don't have any of the stuff on here to do the callbacks. I didn't, you know, I'm not a C++ coder. I haven't got the callback ready to go. But what you'd need to do is have a bind event to, and it's called Steam Micro TNX Authorization Callback is the proper name for it. You need to make sure that you have that ready to go. You need to bind the event to a custom event, and I'll put that here, and just put Steam Callback. And then when you bind the event, it should already have a custom event. I'm just simply doing this as like, an example of what it should be. And this will have on it the app ID, the order ID, and authorized. Authorized being a bool. Now the bool is key. You need to check the bool to make sure that it's returned true, to make sure that the payment got authorized. I'll just quickly drag across another project that I've been working on, that we can see the example of this. So if we just have a look here, we have our pay for purchase success, and we print out a couple of things. Now here we have an event that is called on initialization, to make sure that it's set up correctly, and it binds the event Steam macro TNX authorization callback to the Steam micro callback event, which automatically has, as I said, the app ID, the order ID, and the authorized. Now what this will mean is, if this here gets through and is successful, it will pop up the Steam overlay on your game. It will, the Steam overlay with the little purchase window will pop up. It will contain, the name of the item that you purchase, and for the display name, the description, which is exactly why I said you need to make sure that you get it accurate. It'll have all the info on payment and stuff. Now, with Steam, as long as you authorize it and you have the money in your account and it goes through, then this event will then fire. This callback will fire, and you need to check this to make sure that the event went through, that the money was valid, Steam accepted it, Steam took the money out of the player's account, and it's been authorized. Once that happens and that has been set to true, you then need to confirm the order. Now, I'm doing this specifically on this one, just simply because it's, I've already got it all set up in another project for a game that I was working on a while ago, so we might as well use it to check, because I can't do some of this stuff because I don't have the correct C++ code to do it. But you then do confirm order, and you call confirm purchase with the order ID to make sure that you pass it through, which again will be the same order ID that you get from the pay for purchase success. Then off of there, you need to, off the success node, it will contain the items that you're purchasing. Now, there is a couple of other things that it returns, like the order ID. If you want to email the order to the player, in like an e-receipt type of way, along with the purchase date. This could be useful more for like a mobile game, or a weird platform game rather than Steam. But Steam will automatically, anyone that uses Steam, you get a receipt through normally to say that you've purchased something, and you can have a look back at your history anyway. But the main thing that we're looking at here is the items return, the array. Then off of there, you would simply do whatever it is you need to do. You get all the normal item fields like the item ID and the custom data. This is there when you'd hook up a validation to say you've successfully purchased this, and then update whatever it is that you need to update. Again, you should always call get user inventory in order to make sure that no matter what you've done is, being updated. That if the player has purchased something, you update it. End of. But yeah, so this is the correct way of doing it once you have Steam. Like, once you have the correct callback microtransaction, callback in C++, or there might be a plugin out there somewhere for it. But once you have it done, then you need to make sure that once it's successfully authorized, that it goes through. Obviously, I can't show you that due to the fact that I don't have I don't have the callback in order to do so. But that was just an overview of what you need to do in order to get it set up. And then once it's set up, then obviously that's where you then update the UI or anything that you need to do. And I think that brings us to the end of this series. Well, the end of this episode anyway. We have successfully... Wow, we've done a lot this episode. Didn't realise how much we'd actually done. So we successfully got the user inventory from within the engine. I've shown you the way to get the store items or the catalog items. Again, the catalog and store items are pretty much exactly the same. How to pay for an item using the virtual currency. And then how to start, and then obviously I've shown you the completed method, but how to do it via the Steam platform iOS, basically. On the Playfab side of things, we've successfully set up the store. We've successfully added a few items to the economy into our catalogs. We've set up a virtual currency, just a very basic one with nothing in it. I've also shown you the basics of bundles, containers, drop tables, and stores. So I believe that brings us to the end of this episode. Let's just have a quick look at what is coming up next on our episodes. After this, we are going to start looking into the multiplayer matchmaking side of things. Although we may move that back and look at some of the other things first because I mean matchmaking and multiplayer is like a big step into some of the things that the game's going to need. So we may look at other things like news, notifications, experiments and A/B testing and rewards, that sort of stuff, and then we may look into matchmaking, simply because matchmaking is a lot of work to get working. There's a lot of to and fro from Playfab to the game, and we need to make sure everything's set up. Not only that, but as well, if you're going to look into the server side of things, the servers can be pretty tricky to get everything correctly hooked up and working. So, it might take a little bit of time for myself to get the back end side of things of that working, to be able to show you how it's done without it breaking completely. However, one thing I have just remembered is that in a previous episode we looked at automation, I believe it was, in order to do with leaderboards and statistics. Now, in leaderboards, if you guys remember, there is a way of setting up prize tables. Now, in order to do this, you had to have an item, basically, in order to do it. So, in here, you would simply have, like, name of the prize table, the description, the leaderboard, so the statistic name that would be there, and then the table contents. Now, this would be rank from 1 to whatever it is. Yeah. It would, you send a notification, but then in here you can grant item, grant virtual currency, execute cloud script, all that sort of stuff. So if you wanted to, you could grant an item, you can look at the items that we currently have, maybe give them a key, and there we go. So that would then give everyone from rank 1 to 10, inclusively, of course, that would give all of them a key. Now, obviously, you can add in different ones. So look, it automatically does it as well. It automatically takes the last one and adds on, like a 10 as the base. So you could have, like, especially if your game became pretty popular, you could have a good leaderboard system or automatically give players rewards. I mean, it doesn't have to be a single item. I believe it can be a bundle. You could give them a bundle. So you can have different bundles depending on where they come in the leaderboards. The possibility there is great. You could create an entire leaderboard system that you don't even have to worry about, because it automatically, whenever it comes time to update the leaderboard, as in go into it and reset the leaderboard, it would automatically grab all of the ranks that are here and give everyone a prize if they needed it. So now that we've created the items in our economy, this is something that you guys can go back and set up yourself if this is something you need to do. But yeah, I just thought I'd quickly add that in because I remembered that we couldn't do it in the last one because we didn't have any items set up ready for our prize table. But now that we've covered that, I think we've done everything in today's episode. And I believe next time we'll cover news, notifications, and then the episode after that will be experiments, A/B testing, and then I think we'll finally get around to the multiplayer matchmaking side of things. So I hope everyone's had a good time, and I'll see you guys later. Bye!